Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Kernels of Truth, brought to you by Progress Kentucky. Thank you for joining us this week. We're going to cover a couple of important Kentucky political news items in our news of the week. Then we're thrilled to be bringing in our guest, the Reverend Dr. Leah Schade, the author of 5 books and an expert on a wide range of theological, faith, and lay issues. But we're going to focus on the recent rise of Christian nationalism in Kentucky and the national political landscape and what to do about it. So should be a super exciting show. So glad you've joined us. But before we get into it, I want to just check in, see if you're ready to help create a more compassionate Commonwealth. It is clear that we're going to need long-term power building to build better policies and political outcomes in Kentucky. We really hope you'll support Progress Kentucky in our campaign to do that, to make that happen. Of course, there are 2 sources of power on the political playing field, they say. That's money or people. So let us know how you want to help. We are launching 2 new committees as we speak, one focused on the legislature, another focused on rural engagement. So if you're in Kentucky, you're progressive, and you're fired up to help bring more progressive progress to our fair Commonwealth, let us know. We'll plug you into one of these efforts, or of course, you can do the other thing, the filthy lucre thing. You can make a contribution right now via our secure online website, ActBlue, to help turn Kentucky purple. $10, $20, $200. It all adds up. It all helps us bring about that political change. And none of it is tax deductible because we're a political organization. So, all right, but let's go ahead and check in with our co-host. Let us know who you are, where you are, and what are you protesting today? You there on the internet, we mean you. Let's hear what you're most concerned about today as well. I know there's a lot to pick from. Feel free to put in the chat while we are sharing ours. I'm Aaron, coming to you from Childsburg in Lexington. My sign says I stand with Bishop Budd. That's what my sign says right now. All right, how about you there, Nate? Nate, are you there?
I am, and unmuted finally. Hello, hello, hello. This is Nate Orshan coming live and direct from South Frankfort, where we can actually see the Capitol building from my office window. Well, you can, but I can if I stand just right. I don't know. This has been such a bummer of a week that it's like, how do you pick one thing to protest, right? But I'll just say I am so glad my governor is Andy. That's my sign.
That's a nice
support sign, not really a protest.
No, it's fine. It's like it's a little bit like bragging, really. Because there are a number of states whose governors are not like Andy, and
they're not
bad for them. But the voters decide, so they get what they get. All right, so we're gonna jump right into news of the week. But I just want to say how thrilled I am to have you back on the show, Nate. Thank you so much for joining us. And really excited to get to our guest. So let's hear the news of the week. You got an important story for sure.
So I came to this issue expecting to sort of rage against our Attorney General, Russell Coleman, for his bigotry and bias. And don't worry, I will. But the issue has a complication that needs to be dealt with. So as reported by Alex Acquisto in the Lexington Herald Leader yesterday, January 21st, quote, Republican Attorney General Russell Coleman on Friday sued outgoing U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra, that was Biden's HHS secretary, over the mandate that all state foster and adoption agencies, quote, ensure that they have providers who will support a child's purported lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning intersex, non-binary, two-spirit, or non-conforming gender identity or expression, unquote. The new standard also requires states to offer to place children according to their asserted gender identity or status rather than sex. So on the one hand, you have the federal government telling state foster and adoption agencies that the people doing the fostering and the adopting have to support a kid's queerness if they're queer. To someone like me who respects human rights and who has benefited so much from having all my LGBTQ friends and family in my life, it's a no-brainer. Of course, queer kids need to be in supportive homes. And have you heard about the elevated risk of death by suicide for young queer people? They are more than 4 times more likely to make a suicide attempt than their straight peers, according to the Trevor Project, a national LGBTQ plus advocacy and support organization. And as they state in their headline about the page about this, quote, LGBTQ plus young people are not inherently prone to suicide risk. Right. Let's repeat that. Not inherently prone to suicide risk because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, right? But rather placed at higher risk because of how they are mistreated and stigmatized in society. So, duh, of course you shouldn't place a queer kid with a foster or adoptive home where their very identity is going to be met with disbelief or scorn or emotional abuse. But here's the but. We don't have enough people willing to foster kids, period. It's so bad that last October, State Auditor Allison Ball said that her office was going to be investigating the State Cabinet for Health and Family Services. So it's another Kentucky cabinet, right? Another, yeah. Why? Because it reports that they had, quote, foster children and teenagers sleeping on cots and air mattresses in office buildings, unquote, i.e., because they had nowhere else to go. That's how bad the need is. So into this dire need come religious organizations like Sunrise Children's Services, run by the Kentucky Baptist Convention and also contracted by the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. There's a little link there. And they're doing the work. They're placing kids with family, but they have their own agenda. Coleman says that the Biden administration rules are, quote, burdensome, making it harder for religious-based organizations and families of faith to care for children, unquote. And to an extent, he has a point. Why make it harder for organizations that are trying to help kids when there's clearly a screaming need for foster placements? But then, why increase the likelihood for stigmatizing queer kids and pushing them further down along the road to self-harm when you don't got it? Religion, at the end of the day, is a choice. I know, calling, we're going to talk to Reverend Schade, but it's really a choice. But sexual orientation and gender, they're intrinsic to everybody. They're part of who you are. When did you choose to be right-handed or left-handed? Right? See what I mean? So here's my anger at A.G. Coleman for prioritizing providers' intolerant religious convictions over queer kids' identity. Full stop. And then here's my anger at us being stuck, having to rely on these religious organizations because who else is stepping up? So that's my rant for the day.
Yeah.
Oh, your camera's, oh, there we go.
Yeah, my camera's having issues. So it does seem like there's a lot of kind of nuance to this issue, right? Because there's just such a need for homes for for kids who don't have one. I know there's been a recent wrinkle about this with the idea of kinship care and whether relatives can get some of the the resources directed to them to help support kids that that aren't theirs, but at least are in their family networks or whatever.
Which is great. I mean,
yeah.
that right on the face of it, that's a wonderful thing. But it's the juxtaposition of just this terrible societal problem and this need with, religious bigotry. And, we're stuck right now. I mean, needless to say, I didn't go on into it, but the chance of that, that directive from Health and Human Services lasting more than 2 weeks is very slim, right? Because we've seen the Trump administration is coming in and pulling all this Biden administration stuff back. So
I mean, some of that stuff is a little bit more locked in, but I think what I've seen with the Trump administration, they don't seem to care much about the laws. They're just like directing agencies to do things and kind of laws be damned, right?
Vibes.
So
it's the first vibes-based presidency. Evil vibes.
No, it is. It's unfortunate for sure, but I you want kids to be in a home that supports them for sure. So I can see why the Biden administration did what they did, and we'll see how long it lasts. And really unfortunate to see our AG kind of standing up for bigotry and homophobia. Not that it's shocking, in a state that still allows conversion therapy, right? So, all right. So we're going to do, speaking of kids, we got another story, kind of kid-centric story that I want to bring you from Louisville Public Media. So Kentucky students with the Kentucky Student Voice team. You might remember the Kentucky Student Voice team because we've had them on the show a couple of times. They were big champions of opposing Amendment 2, the school voucher, the effort to pass an amendment to put our tax dollars to work in unaccountable private schools. So these kids are great advocates for public schools, and they just took it one step further. They filed a lawsuit demanding that the state provide adequate public education, which I think is phenomenal. So they filed this in Franklin County, arguing that the state has failed its constitutional obligation, and based on the landmark 1989 Kentucky Supreme Court decision that found the state's public school system was unconstitutionally deficient and systematically was failing students. That's Rose versus Council for Better Education, which led to the Kentucky Education Reform Act, with it radically altered the way education funding was dispersed across the state, and it put in placed new curriculum standards and increased accountability. So that was 89. But the state has slid backwards since those reforms, and that's according to this lawsuit by the Kentucky Student Voice team. And basically saying that the legacy, their quote, really good quote, the legacy of Rose has wilted, and they pointed to lackluster test scores, school funding that hasn't kept up with inflation, and that the state is failing its mandate. So really, I think important step. Great to see these students really leading on a very important issue. And this is certainly something that we talked about a lot in our advocacy and opposition to Amendment 2. Like, the way to fix public education is with funding and with smart leadership, right? But funding is a huge piece of it, and it's not about removing funding to send it to private schools, right? So, and this lawsuit actually names the leaders of the Republican-controlled state legislature and the Kentucky Board of Education as defendants in the lawsuit, asks the court to make a declaratory judgment, as they did in the 89 case, leaving the reforms up to the state legislature if the courts declare the public school system as unconstitutional, right? So really interesting. It'll be very, we'll watch it play out. Nothing's quick in court, but I think it should definitely provide for some important insights into how leaders are approaching public education, and some potential solutions to the challenges. And I think the Kentucky Student Voice team has done a really good job of laying out the case. Parker, if you want to pull up some of those images, but they make the case very well, and they're sharing that right now, on social media. That 18.5% of Kentucky schools have no visual or performing arts classes for their students right now, so nearly 20%. And since the 90s, Kentucky's base funding of education has declined by 25%. So since that Rose case. Also, currently, only 41% of Kentucky eighth graders are proficient or above in reading. So, really, not even at halfway mark. And Kentucky is one of just 11 states with no civics course requirement. So half of Kentuckians can't name a local elected official or the three branches of government. Half of Kentuckians. And in terms of mental health, in 2023, nearly 1 in 5 Kentucky high school students reported seriously considering taking their own lives. 100 plus Kentucky schools lack a school counselor, and nearly half of Kentucky schools do not meet the required counselor to student ratio. So yeah, lots of going on, lots of, I think, reasons, legitimate reasons for these students to, the Kentucky Student Voice team to bring this lawsuit. I think it's aggressive. I think it's important. And I think they're showing leadership in a time that our state education system desperately needs more leadership. So I don't know, Nate, have you heard about that case? What do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I did. And, is it too late to just leave the state in these kids' hands? Because I think they've got it more on the ball than most of the adults. Um, yeah, no, in a sense, it's a little bit shameful, and it should be, to have one's own students, sort of petitioning, as it were, the government to just do the bare minimum of what's needed. And that's also previously statutorily required. But I was listening to my old Kentucky podcast, which, if you're watching this show, that's another good one if you want to get another good progressive sort of podcast to add to your mix. But they were talking about this too, and they made the point at the end, after going through it, that good luck getting the legislature to do anything, even if it wins in the Kentucky Supreme Court. These guys are not. They don't care. They don't care. So even if there's they are impelled to do it, who's going to force them to come up with fairer budgeting and adequate sort of resources for all our state schools? So I don't know, but I guess that's a problem. That would be a good problem to have, because we first got to get through all the legal stuff and getting up to the Supreme Court finally, because I assume it's going to be appealed. But I note also that the kids filed in Franklin County, so we've got a couple of good judges there, including Philip Shepard, and they're good, sort of independent-minded. They're not really partisan, although I think ultra conservatives would try to paint them that way. But that bodes well, at least for a fair hearing and a good shot.
Yeah, definitely seems like the court hopefully is up to the challenge. I think your point is fair about whether the folks they're actually suing would be up to the challenge of fixing the education system. I think with some clear guidance and guardrails from the judiciary, perhaps, and then ideally, the kind of state board of education, which isn't quite as it's not an arm of the legislature, right? And maybe
Right.
maybe the education cabinet could help out as well there, right? So some folks who may be a little more rational, a little less kind of brought in by or guided by ridiculous blind ideology and kind of hate for public school teachers. They're the union.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's not solely up to the legislature, I get, but they're clearly they're a stumbling block.
Those are the folks who brought you Amendment 2, so clearly their suite of solutions probably not up to the challenge for sure.
No.
All right, well, really, yeah, great. Great to, I don't know. We've got a minute before the legislature goes back into session, right? So that's going to be early February. But I think really important that people get ready to engage with the legislature. That's one thing I'll point out. If you don't have the legislative comment line on speed dial, take a minute and do that, because I think there's going to be a lot of things coming at us from the GOP supermajority that are going to be worth weighing in on, and ensuring that your views and your opinions are being heard by your legislator. Not to say that means they will do what we ask them, but certainly always important to raise a ruckus if we don't like the direction they're headed. But there's also some important stuff that I think will likely get done, and so we're excited to kind of keep you in the loop there. And again, one more plug for our legislative committee, which is just launching now. We've got our next committee meeting, I think, happening on the 10th. So kind of following the first week of the legislature back, we'll see what they're up to and see what needs to be done. So if you want to pay closer attention to Frankfurt and the goings on there and work collaboratively to do a little bit more accountability and education around it, we would love to have your support. So,
and of course, the Facebook site will have, comments about legislation that we think people should take action on, and certainly on the show, we'll be discussing.
Everywhere you look, If you're looking at Progress Kentucky, we're going to be in the weeds of the legislature as much as we can stomach, perhaps. I don't know.
Do you like another weed salad, Aaron?
Not the most inspiring body, but everywhere you look these days, right? So hard to find inspiration in the governmental process, legislative process. But yeah, all right. So I think we're going to try to see if we can pull in our guest, the Reverend Dr. Leah Schade, who's actually been on this show before, and always brings an informed and inspired perspective. And I think, Nate, did you want to intro this?
Sure. Wait, where is? So yeah, okay. What is Aaron telling me to do? What? Well, my dear friends, I'm here to tell you that Reverend Dr. Leah D. Schade is the Associate Professor of Preaching and Worship at Lexington Theological Seminary in Kentucky and ordained in the ELCA. But, very important, she does not speak for either entity. Her views are her own. Reverend Dr. Schade is the author or editor of 5 books, the most recent of which is Preaching and Social Issues, Tools and Tactics for Empowering Your Prophetic Voice. Leah, I guess we're going by Leah.
Yes,
Hello.
Leah is fine, yes.
Yes. Well, Leah, as I'm telling our audience, received the Kentucky Council of Churches Award in 2019. Yay! She is also co-founder of the Clergy Emergency League, a network of 2,800 pastors throughout the U.S. that provides support, accountability, resources, and networking for clergy to confront what? Christian nationalism, and prophetically minister in their congregations and the public square in this time of political upheaval, social unrest, and partisan division. If you'd like to keep up with Leah, she blogs and shares her work on the Patheos blog site Eco Preacher, and that URL is patheos.com/blogs/eco preacher, and I'll spell that out: ECOPREACHER. So, as we consider diving into the topic of Christian nationalism and its influence on partisan politics in Kentucky, we thought having Dr. Schade back on the show would be a great help for our viewers. So welcome back.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Aaron. It's great to be with you all. I'm so glad that your voices are going strong here in Kentucky. It's really, really important.
Oh, thank you. Well, it takes a village, big national village. So let's circle back to the concept of Christian nationalism. Could you define it for us and tell us what's happening with it right now? And I do mean certainly right now.
Yeah, Christian nationalism is actually not really Christian at all. It uses a Christian veneer to fuse with a nationalist agenda in order to give it a certain level of mythology and authority and seemingly religious grounding. But in fact, that is really a veneer for practices and ideologies that are against women, against people of color, against the environment, against LGBTQIA, and are in favor of hierarchy, patriarchy, violence, xenophobia, all of those things. So what we're seeing in our nation now with the administration that has taken power, the Christian nationalist agenda, which we saw very clearly laid out in Project 2025 during the campaign, is now being put into action. And this is an attempt, and really has a lot of muscle behind it now, to impose what some would call Christofascism. Christofascism. So it is a fascist ideology that is grounded in a sort of patina of Christianity, but in fact is very dangerous and is going to cause a lot of harm to a lot of people, starting right now with immigration, which we saw a flurry of anti-immigration legislative or executive orders that are meant to instill fear in the immigrant and undocumented population. So one of the things that we're seeing in Kentucky in particular are flyers that are put out by something called the Trinity White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. And they are apparently, they put out flyers in northern Kentucky telling immigrants that they should get out now before they are deported. And the flyer has an image of Uncle Sam kicking an immigrant family. And then below that, you see, and this is the really interesting thing, you see the headquarters listed in all of the surrounding states where people can learn more. So it has a twofold purpose. It is to instill fear in the immigrant population, but it's also a recruiting tool. Okay, so if you look at the lettering, I don't know if we can bring up the picture of it, but the lettering is actually in the style of Gothic Frankter font, which was what the Nazis used during the reign of Hitler. So it's meant to instill fear in people, but it's also a way to recruit others who might be drawn into Christian nationalism to join this particular group. So there's actually competition among these far right Christian nationalist groups. They're in competition for members. And so you're going to see an increase in very public actions of intimidation, violence, property damage, especially now that we've seen the January 6th rioters being released from prison. They're going to be organizing and they're going to be terrorizing communities, partly to exercise their own power, but also to be recruiting people as well.
So now that, totally terrified. It seems like,
sorry about that.
It seems like very much, from Project 2025, from, the beach house of, Supreme Court Justice Alito, right, where the appeal to heaven flag was being, flown. Purely his wife, of course. She controls all the flags in the Alito household. To really that march on the Capitol, where I feel that idea of, that Christo-fascist, like ideology, right? It just seems like we are in a moment where Christian nationalism, Christo-fascism is ascendant. And I think what I would be really interested in your thoughts on, what should we be doing about it, right? I think sometimes when we communicate, threats, there's a whole lot of, they're just overreacting, or the left's just being crazy. And, we're using words that people don't understand, fascist. They don't know. People don't know what a fascist is. Christo-fascist probably makes it more confusing for people. But what's the threat we should be communicating to folks who maybe aren't, watching this show? What do we want to point to say, look, this is something that really is alarming. It really is challenging, these kind of fundamental freedoms we all take for granted, and put in a context that Joe, non-liberal, maybe even a Trump voter, but didn't vote for, a return to racism. What are the, what's the best way to kind of characterize this for folks?
That's a great question. One of the things that I would encourage people is just to, first of all, just Google it. Look up what is Christian nationalism, because there are some people who want to say that actually Christian nationalism is a good thing. So there are some some elected officials who say, yeah, we do want to be a Christian nationalist nation, right? Because
Yeah,
there
MTG
is
said that, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene said that,
exactly,
right? I'm a
right,
proud Christian nationalist.
right. And I want to distinguish between nationalism and patriotism. Patriotism is having love for your country, and that's not a bad thing. I'm a patriot. I love democracy. I love the United States, and it's because I love the United States and I love democracy, and because I love my neighbor as Jesus commands me to, that I do not agree or ascribe to or support any policies or any actions that would demonize certain groups, certain demographics, to say they are less than us, they are less than human, they are rapists, drug lords, whatever. That mass characterization is a way to dehumanize people. And the other thing I would say is the oligarchy. So that's the people who have billions of dollars who are controlling the economy and really controlling it, who really bought this election. They are using Christian nationalism to turn us all against each other, while they are enjoying the fruits of what they have invested in, which is to get us all fighting each other so that we do not fight the real power, which is the gross accumulation of wealth, or I should not even accumulation, the stealing of wealth from the rest of us. If we're focusing on each other and we're engaged in these battles, then we're not really focusing on who's pulling the strings here. So I want to say it's not just a Republican or Democratic issue. We need to see each other's humanity, and we need to be in solidarity with each other and not turn on each other, but in fact say, look, we're all in this together, and we need to be supportive of a country where we all have a fair shot, where everybody is treated with equity and fairness, just like anybody would want to be treated. Those are the real values of Christianity. The ones that Christian nationalists say are the values are actually counter to what Jesus taught. Does that help?
I think it does. Yeah, for
Helps
sure.
me. I mean, it's like, gosh, anybody can just call themselves anything and pretend to be the opposite, of what they are.
Well,
That's a little, yeah.
yeah.
Please.
So that's actually another tactic, Nate. Is when reality and language and facts are malleable. And remember, in the first administration, we heard about alternative facts. That's a euphemism for lying. And one of the reasons that Christian nationalism has taken hold in about what experts estimate is about 30% of the U.S. population leans towards or actively supports Christian nationalism. What draws them into it, first of all, is a feeling that they are aligned with a power that is going to help their lives in some way. And we've weaponized the feeling that, especially of whites, that we're losing our country, we're losing our power, we're losing our wealth to the blacks and the gays and the immigrants, and that is a myth that is being repeated in circles of disinformation, and people are literally being brainwashed with this, so that when they see their neighbors, they don't see human beings, they see caricatures that have been created for them that are not based in fact at all. So it is very difficult to combat this, as we've seen with the results of the election, because the propaganda and disinformation is so rampant in this country. And when you have a platform like Twitter, owned by the richest man in the world, who controls the flow of information, and then Facebook, owned by another one of the richest men in the world, and then mainstream media owned by, billionaires. We have a really serious information problem. So one of the things that I advise my students in the seminary where I teach, and the pastors that I am colleagues with and I advise, is that it's one of the jobs of preachers and ministers is to educate people about what Christian nationalism is so that they can identify it, they can distinguish the difference between Christian nationalism and a Christian who is patriotic, like make those distinctions, and be able to say, when when you say certain things, this is not what Jesus taught, and call it out and nip it in the bud and say, this is not who we are. This is not who we are called to be. That's one of the jobs of the church, is to call out that Christo-fascist imperialism and say, this is not who we are.
Speaking of Bud, so I wanted to get your take on what happened earlier this week at the I think multi-denominational kind of prayer service that was in Washington D.C., where Bishop Bud, who is Episcopalian, I think very clearly kind of what I would say updated some of the language in the red letters. Jesus challenging us to care for the folks who are powerless. So she very specifically turned to President Trump and challenged him to show care and compassion for the trans kids and their parents who are afraid right now, for folks who might be in this country illegally but are very much contributing to our society. And it just seemed like people have freaked out about it. I think is a fair characterization of the response on the right. What's your take on that? Obviously, that's not Christian nationalism. I think that's just Christianity. But the fact that somebody from a pulpit was challenging Trump seemed to really set off the right in a way that I think was very telling. But what's your take on that?
Yes, one of the great things about her delivery, and I'm going to analyze it from a homiletician's perspective, is that she was not finger wagging. She did not raise her voice. Her tone was compassionate, calm, firm, but not in any way nasty, as he had characterized it in his tweet. So if you listen, so I actually read his tweet first, his response, and I thought, before I saw the sermon, I was like, wow, she must have really laid into him. And then I watched, and I was like, that's it. Like she was not in his face. She was just, she was as gentle as you could possibly be in her delivery of this. But it was really clear what she was asking for, which is exactly what Jesus calls us to, is to look out for those who are most vulnerable. And I will tell you, my son, who is 18, also saw the video before I did. He's like, Mom, did you see this video of this bishop? I was like, how do you know about this? He's like, it's all over social media. I said, and you watched it? He's like, yeah. I had to say that's probably one of the most courageous things I've ever seen. It's like, wow. Like, to me, for an 18-year-old to see this, that made me so proud as a pastor, as a preacher, like a young person seeing this bold but gentle witness, like that. I'm almost without words at the feeling that I have that, yes, this is what we need to see more of. And is she taking a huge risk? Absolutely she is. She knew that, and she had the courage to do it anyway. And that's the message that I would want to convey to preachers across the United States who know that we are part of our vocation is to speak truth to power. Many of us took vows about this. And when we shy away from this, we are not fulfilling our vows as ordained ministers, as preachers. And so she models how to do that in a way that is built. I mean, it was really about building bridges of faith and trust and love and compassion. And if somebody rejects that, that's on them. It was not because of her delivery. Her delivery could not, and her message could not have been better.
Yeah, it just seems so like this is just what Jesus told us to do, right? She's just reminding, and it seemed to me that like just because it is blown up, right? One member of Congress said that she should be deported, right? I don't know how you deport, like a citizen for like doing her job as a preacher, but whatever. Our own member of Congress, Andy Barr, he put out something that I don't know if you've seen it, but it is I think underwhelming. Saying as a conservative Episcopalian who supports President Trump and his agenda, profoundly disappointed that Bishop Budd politicized today's inaugural service of prayer for the nation. And this is where I thought this was very interesting. Disregarding President Trump's appointment of Scott Bessent, a brilliant, openly gay man to serve as Treasury Secretary, and Elon Musk, a genius first-generation legal immigrant to lead the new Department of Government Efficiency, her gratuitous criticisms ring hollow. And sadly, the only message Bishop Budd delivered through unwelcoming and hypocritical words to the president was that the Episcopal Church's motto of all are welcome doesn't apply to the majority of Americans who voted for Donald Trump. So that I was very just a little, I thought it was a little gross, right? The idea that, some, near billionaire, like hedge fund guy who is like openly gay is the same as a trans kid, or that, Elon Musk, who, again, the most wealthy man on the face of the earth is similar to a man without papers who's, working in the agriculture industry is like, it's just like offensive to me, but he wraps himself up and says that she's being hypocritical. It's confounding. And I guess, it's just here's where we are in our like political discourse these days.
Well, and that's a tactic, is to make these false equivalencies, because it sounds like it has an air of self-righteousness to it. And for somebody who's not thinking critically about this and wants to agree with him, it's like, yeah. And another one of the reasons we're in the situation that we're in is because we have not taught people skills in critical thinking, and to kind of break this down and say, so when he's calling her hypocritical, he's actually the one who's doing it. But again, this is a tactic of domestic abusers, of gaslighters, is to accuse the one who is vulnerable of hypocrisy or bullying. Like, and it's flipping the script, it's turning the tables, and it is gross, it's offensive, it's incorrect, it's lying, and it's incredibly manipulative, and it's incredibly effective for the base. And so it's very important when somebody like Bishop Budd, or even the pastor of the small community church, speaks truth to power like this, that the community come around them in support to say, I loved your protest sign, Aaron. I stand with Bishop Budd. So that, because what we're seeing is that people are falling away from their courage at this time. We're seeing a great revealing of who's going to bend the knee and who's really going to stick up for us and stand for what's right. And she did that. And that's going to give courage to others. Of course, there will be backlash. She's now got a target on her. The the risk of stochastic violence, which is somebody completely unrelated saying, okay, I'm going to take care of this problem, and then commit violence against her or Episcopal churches or whatever. The risk of stochastic violence increases, and yet she did what she had to do. So we cannot cower. We have to stand with integrity at this moment, and we have to fulfill our vows, and we have to fulfill our vocation, our prophetic vocation.
Awesome. Nate, you have a question for Reverend Schade?
Here. Oh, I have so many questions, and I want to delve into sort of like the attraction to hierarchy and things like that, and epistemology. How one knows what is true that is actually true. But I think time forbids. But I guess I just want to thank you so much for joining and doing your own modeling here as well. Showing how to be empathetic, showing how to be critically thinking, and sort of pointing a way toward a better way to be a better person. And so I think that your work is cut out for you.
Yeah, it's one of the things I wrote about in my new book, Preaching and Social Issues, were different ways that pastors can go about addressing this, depending on whether they want to go with a gentle, invitational, or robust approach. And I've got like an assessment tool to help people figure out, well, where am I, and what's my relationship with the congregation, and what's my personal risk. So everybody has to sort of think about and discern what is their role, how do they want to exercise their voice. But whether you do it gently, the way Bishop Budd did it, or you do it through protest signs, or you do it by, reaching out to the trans kid in your congregation and saying, we stand with you. You are a child of God, and we love you no matter what. Like, there are many ways to do this, but everybody has to do something in order to stand in solidarity and not cower to the fear and the hatred that is now moving over us.
Yeah, that's powerful. And one thing I just wanted to touch on, I think we brought this up on the news, a couple episodes ago, but just one of the things that I found most astounding was that, the Kentucky legislature, like the first bill filed, not HB1, because that's the one that's the most important for their General Assembly or whatever, but it was one to put the 10 Commandments in classrooms, right? Like, which, if you know the history of this is something that actually we tried before. Kentucky was the first state to try to go down this road, and it ran headlong into the Supreme Court. But that was, decades ago, where the Supreme Court said, yep, nope, you can't do that. It'll be very interesting to see. I feel like there's a reason they're doing it again, right? Because, the Louisiana law is probably fast-tracked to get to a decision by the Supreme Court. But, they're all kind of piling on right now. Do you see that as, like, at all related to this kind of resurgence of Christian nationalism?
Absolutely. The separation of church and state is not, the Establishment Clause is not something that Christian nationalists support. They want a theocracy. And one of the ways to signal where we are is by insisting that there be Christian prayer in public schools, for example, and that we post the 10 Commandments in schools and in public places. And, what's funny is that if people really read their Bible, they would know that there are actually two different versions of the 10 Commandments. There's one in Exodus, and there's a version in Deuteronomy, and there's different ways to divide which is the first, second, and third, and fourth, and different wording. And so, like, what do we actually mean by that? But and the assumption that the country was founded on Christian principles, that's one of the myths of Christian nationalism, actually is not correct. That at best, some of the founders were deists, They believed in what's called a clockwork God, that God created the universe and then let it run like a clock, but it's not involved with human affairs. Is that's actually closer to what the what the founders believed in. So to say that we are a Christian nation is incorrect historically. It's incorrect according to our Constitution. And to insist on that and to do these kinds of things to signal that this is the direction we're going, all of this erodes at not impose, the government should not impose a religion in the public square. It can, churches can be engaged and critique. Like, you can't say to a pastor, well, you shouldn't be talking about these political issues, because pastors can. You can do that. You just can't say you got to vote for this person or not that person. That we can't do. But to engage on policy, to engage on these kinds of issues is something the church can do. And what the government cannot do is to impose a single religion on the public. So yes, what the Kentucky legislature is doing is not constitutional.
Yeah, we'll see if the Supreme Court, this current iteration of the Supreme Court, the appeal to heaven flag bearing Supreme Court, concurs. But Reverend Schade, thank you again for joining us, for sharing your views with us, sharing your expertise with us. And I hope folks do check out Eco Preacher, because you're kind of constantly in there, doing your work to challenge folks. What is it? I think one of my former pastors said, the job of the clergy really is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, right? That's so, so important, the work that you all do. And I appreciate you coming on with us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting a religious voice into this public square. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right, so we are going to do a quick call to action because, again, this isn't just talking heads on the interwebs. This is a digital demonstration for a more compassionate Commonwealth. We are up to about 75 actions so far in our effort to expand excused early voting to include caregivers to the ill and infirm. So those voters are actually allowed to use the 6 days of excused early voting in Kentucky, but the folks who care for those folks who are ill and sick don't get to use it. So many of our friends listening likely know there are 3 days of no excuse early voting, the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before the Tuesday election. What a lot of folks experienced with the no excuse early voting this last go around was very long lines, which really works against the ill and infirm and their caregivers. So utilizing the 6 days before the no excuse days will allow for shorter lines. Increased flexibility is exactly what those folks need to utilize their right to select our representatives to weigh in on our ballot measures. So great news on this effort. We have got, a lawmaker who's ready to champion it. Our friend, Representative Adam Moore, has taken up this issue, but we need some Republicans to stand with that common sense, solutions-oriented new lawmaker, because new lawmakers, need support of maybe more experienced lawmakers to get things moving in this supermajority GOP. So I think it's a very nonpartisan fix to an issue that really does matter. So I hope folks can click through, take action. I will flag if you have a new representative, or if your representative kind of lost and you now have somebody else, you might see the old representative's name on the action alert when you take it. Don't worry, at the back end we can make sure to send all those letters to the new representatives once that gets updated.
Yeah, that happened to me actually.
Erica is not on there yet.
No.
Representative Hancock's not on there yet. And similar for me, formerly Representative Shilton Stevenson. I don't remember the name of the person that won, but yeah. So we will make sure that your letter gets to your duly elected representative for sure. But yeah, this is a good one to weigh in on because it's an important issue, and one that, again, the Republicans should not have a problem with this. This isn't some vast conspiracy to elect liberal people. It's just let more people vote, at any rate. And so, yeah, I think that's mostly it. Nate, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, and before I do, it's so great sharing microphones and cameras with you again, Aaron. And another just big shout out to Dr. Reverend Leah Schade, who's just a wonderful leader and so inspiring. And I'm, just so glad to have had a chance to be in her presence digitally here. So I will let our faithful audience here know that Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State and organized as a 501c4. We are affiliated with the Indivisible Project and the Commonwealth Alliance for Voter Engagement, CAVE. And we're also proud members of the Forward Kentucky Network. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Please join us again in 7 short days. We'll be back with another live cast. I don't know if we have the guest lined up quite yet, but, we managed to keep pulling it out week after week, so it'll be worth coming back. Production of this episode, number 194, 194, was by Parker Williams. Nate Orshan, that's me, wrote and performed our theme song. You can find more information and music at my website. It's natosongs.com, natosongs.com. And if you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook or on YouTube, the audio podcast and our show notes are also available where? On Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. And if you do listen to the pod, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you are listening right now. And we'll end with reminding you that logo and some graphic content provided are from Couchfire Media. Thank you all. Have a good night and keep strong.